This is Taking the Lead, a podcast for B2B tech professionals, leaders, and executives who want to learn from female icons in the tech industry. In each episode, host Christina Brady interviews women who are driving revenue for some of the most respected tech companies in the world. Are you ready to get inspired?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Taking the Lead. I'm Christina Brady. I am your host, and I am the SVP of Sales for Speckit, which is the all-in enablement tool that is going to be your number one help in accelerating revenue and helping your selling and support teams get exactly what they need to do their job in their flow of work. I am excited today to be sitting down with a female CEO and founder, Alexine Mudawar. Alexine, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Christina. I'm really excited for this conversation today. I feel like we are long overdue, so this is going to be amazing.
We truly are. I think especially because you have this incredible path that you've taken, that you've trailblazed in so many ways, and that I think so many people will be inspired by. So I obviously gave away what you are doing right now, but tell us a little bit in your own words about your professional journey and how you got where you are.
Yes. So I spent the last 10 plus years in enterprise sales roles with specifically startups. So I only worked at startups through that entire period of time. I found it to be very fascinating. And what came as little to no surprise for many people that know me, I ended up breaking off and going full time with my own startup. So I am in the CEO role now. I joke a lot that I am also still an SDR/AE hybrid. So not a lot has changed, but a lot has also changed.
Well, I think a lot of founders, especially every founder or CEO early on that I talk to is like, I either was a salesperson and now this is helping me to be a CEO and a founder of my own business, or I was never a salesperson and now I'm having to learn how to do it. So to kick us off, what drew you in the first place to being a salesperson? How did you wind up finding your way there?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I went to college and had every intention of graduating for Purdue as being a retail buyer. And what I thought that meant was that I was going to like work for Neiman Marcus and fly to Milan and look at fabrics and do all these like really fancy things. What I learned is that's not necessarily what that role looked like. The money wasn't going to be where I wanted it to be. And so in order to get into the buying program at the time, I actually had to work in a retail store for a period of time to kind of earn my stripes. And then once I got through that period, I needed my recommendation from my manager at the time. And she actually sat me down and she's like, I'm looking through and the way you track your numbers and the numbers that you're hitting every single week in sales. I was having like these $20,000 plus weeks. And she's like, we don't see these numbers. Like, this is very rare. And I think there's something else here. And I think it's sales and you should explore that. And so I don't know what it was, but for some reason I was just like, okay. And then I went on, at the time, I still don't even know really where my first sales role came from, but I believe I went on like Monster and just uploaded my resume into the void and hoped that someone would find it. I got in late to a class of, I think it was like 15 AEs at the time. And I was like late to the table. Everybody was already in the class and they were like, you know what? Your background is interesting. We like it. We think you'd be a good fit. And so we're going to take a shot on you. And then that was an AE role. So I started day one as an account executive. I was booking meetings. I was cold calling. I was closing. I was doing all the things. And here we are.
Yeah. So did you make a deliberate step into tech as a salesperson, or is that just where you wound up landing? I feel like half the people that I talked to very deliberately were like, I wanted to get into tech just because of the opportunity to advance your career in a way that doesn't exist outside of that. And then the other half are people who were like, this was the sales job that I got. I didn't really realize what I was getting into. Which side of it was it for you?
The latter half.
Yeah.
I had no idea what tech sales was when I got into it. And I would definitely not recommend my approach to anyone today, but I did very little research. I just kind of went through Monster. I was like, these 10 companies look interesting. I don't really understand at all what any of them do, but I'm just going to throw my name in the hat and see what happens. And so, yeah, I mean, definitely not deliberately going into tech. And to be honest, I had a huge learning curve in terms of the business acumen and just trying to figure out like what a tech platform was. Like, I just remember these words getting thrown around my first year in sales and just being fully humiliated because I was like, I don't know what that means. I don't know what a demo is. I didn't even really know what a cold call was. And so there were people that were kind behind the scenes where I would kind of like aggregate my questions and go to them secretly and be like, I don't know what these 8 words mean. Will you help me? And so, yeah, definitely not deliberate, but very glad that I made that decision and stayed in tech this whole time. So I'm proud of young Alexine, even though she didn't really know what she was doing.
Young Alexine got you here, right? And it was a similar journey for me. I was in insurance sales and financial planning, and I had my, the friend of my boyfriend, now husband, worked at this little company called Groupon. He's
Never
like,
heard of it.
yeah, you know how to sell stuff, go work there. And it's like when you're not making that deliberate move and you don't really realize what you're breaking into. I too am grateful for younger Christina for jumping in and doing that, because it really does set the path for the rest of your life. And if you think back to those early days as a seller for you, how did you go about learning how to do the job? Because we know later on we start thinking about the impact of community and outside training. But I know when I got first started, that wasn't a thing, right? Like going outside the walls of your organization to learn how to do the job, that wasn't a thing. So how did you learn early on without that element of community that is now much more broadly accepted? How did you learn how to do the job?
A lot of trial and error is the honest answer. I was so hungry to succeed. I felt like I had something to prove from day one. I was on a mostly men team. And so I just felt like I had so much to prove and I had nothing to lose. And so it was just like a blind hunger for success. And so what that meant was, I worked a lot more hours. I was working outside of work hours. I was researching. I was meeting with people. I was listening to how their calls were going. We were on like very much one of those open floor plan kind of call center vibes where we're all doing like 150 plus cold calls a day. I mean, it was absolutely wild. But yeah, I mean, that was the only way I could learn. And then some reps were kind enough to let me like sit in on their demos. So I would learn their demo talk tracks. We were also running our demos at the time. We're doing all the close. I'm a full AE role, which in retrospect, I didn't realize how valuable that was, that my very first role happened to be completely full cycle. And we even managed the accounts as well for a period of time. So I actually think that that was such an integral building block. And because of that, I was also able to learn through these deal cycles. So not only was I learning how to close, but then I would have to learn, like, if I want to maintain this customer, how much do I need to check in? What do I need to make sure that they're getting value wise? And so I was able to learn something throughout the process. But to be honest, the first few deals, I fumbled my way through. Like some of it wasn't pretty and I did my best, but a lot of it was learning on the go. And I don't think that it's so indifferent than what exists today. Even though there's these different channels and means that we can get information, it's still like the
Yes.
first step is you have to put yourself out there. You have to become uncomfortable. You have to put in some extra work and do the research and do all the things that will ultimately make you a really successful seller.
Yeah. And this was selling also in a very different environment, right? Because you're talking about pre 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I think about when I was first learning how to sell, also a very, very male dominated environment, right? And so you're sort of learning that style and where you fit in. And you're also kind of starting to figure out where you're different. But if you were smart, you were using it as your superpower. Or like, there's all these guys selling. I'm going to bring something a little bit different to the table. I'm also going to be better than all of them. Just, that little element of competition. But you're in an office setting, right? Like you're working with other people, you're hearing them, you're picking up on talk tracks. Like I will never forget the feeling of selling in an open floor plan with a whole bunch of
Mhm.
people. And then 2020 hits. Tell me about 2020. And at that point in time, you were still in an AE role, starting to dip very heavily into community. Talk to me about 2020 and this big mix that you had of I'm an individual contributor, I'm still having to sell, I'm now selling at a different company in a remote workforce, and now I'm starting to dip outside of my organization and get involved more in community. Tell me about that giant shift that I feel like you made almost all at once, right when the world changed.
Yes. I feel like when the world changed, when everything changed, I felt like there was this discrete gradient between like who I was pre kind of pandemic and who I was after. Because prior to everything kind of unfolding and taking place, I attached so much of my identity to the company that I worked for. And so something about not being like physically present for me, I had this like weird awakening where I was like, wait, I'm not the company that I work for. Like I work for them, I support them, I want them to be successful, but I'm also myself and I want myself to be successful and I want to have career security. I want to have like job security. And I also kind of had this realization that I had been bit by the entrepreneurial bug. And once you get bit, you don't get unbit. Like it just kind of sits with you. And it's like this thing on your shoulder that's laying in wait. And I just felt like I knew it was coming and I didn't know when, but definitely like around that time, 2020, that was when I was really starting to contextualize and put thought to paper of what does this look like if I was to do this full time? And that was the first time I really allowed myself to have those thoughts. And I will say this, it was very scary, which in retrospect is so strange because both of my parents are entrepreneurs. I come from a very entrepreneurial background and family. I grew up around small businesses. Like this is my childhood. This is like what I grew up around. And so for me, I had never allowed myself to psychologically go there. And so as soon as that world kind of opened up to me, it was just incredible. I was like, wait, what does this look like if I allow myself to do something that I've always wanted to do? And I'm finally giving myself space to freely think about it.
Right. Right. And that's a scary thing. It's a scary thing to feel like you're making this really, really big jump, especially into something where I think a lot of people right now are trying to figure out what is the right way to monetize community. Like what I
Mhm.
see much more obviously are a lot of companies that have a community component, but the
Mhm.
revenue element of it is not the community component directly. It's almost, you see a lot of companies that are like, oh, we have this core product, usually a tech SaaS product, and then we're going to develop a community. And for you, directly benefiting from communities, starting to take part in providing thought leadership, that's where you and I even first intersected, right? Was
Yeah.
bringing you in to provide thought leadership within one of the communities that exists, and you start this side community, women in sales, right? And like that's sort of when the entrepreneurial bug hit, but that was when you also were straddling both fences. You had the job paying the bills, and then you had this community that you were building. Dig a little bit into women in sales and sort of what prompted you to start that and what you thought it was going to be and how you balanced doing both.
It is so funny when I think back. It makes sense. Like, it all makes sense. It's like one of those things where you look in the rear view and you're like, "Duh." So, I had launched the first employee resource group for 2 companies previously, and I feel like that was actually my true first foray into the community kind of world, but it happened very much behind closed doors. Like, it was at these companies, it was intercompany, and that's what I was known for at those companies. Like, I was like the community person, but it was internal. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it was just this transition point. So originally, when Women in Sales started, it started as Women in Sales Club, which was a group on Clubhouse. If anybody remembers the Clubhouse days,
Oh my
and we were
gosh.
these sessions, and so it was really just like a conversation series. And what started to happen, and where I started to realize there was a business there, is that companies started to reach out to us proactively for sponsorships and partnerships. And I was like, "What is this? Like, what's happening?" And they were cutting good checks. And so I was like, wait, this is like a feasible business. And then I looked around and realized there are other people that have been doing this community thing for years. And I'm late to the game a little bit. But at the same time, because these companies are coming proactively and wanting to invest in this, I know that there's a viable business there. And so I really consider like kind of that the club is like phase one, and where we're at today is like really phase two, which is like the true community. We have like the Slack community that's incredibly active. We have all these event series kicking off. We have educational content. We have in-person events that you may have knowledge of, Christina. So there's just so many things happening now, but I think you have to iterate and test and try and then try again and fail and come back. But when I kind of like mush it all together, it's just one of those aha moments. I'm like, it just makes total sense that this took place in the way in which it did.
Yeah. When did you finally have the push that you needed to go full in? on it, because that's the scary part, is when you don't have the other income in a job that frankly you were really, really good at, that you knew how to scale, that you had spent years mastering your skill set, and you knew how to make money as an account executive, and you had the support of the organizations you were working for as a W-2 employee. And at some point, either all of a sudden or a slow burn, you said, you know what? I'm going to let go of the string of the W-2 and I'm going to go all in on this and put all my eggs in the basket. What do you think was the tipping point there for you?
I think there were a few, and I call that, I don't even know if it's a tipping point. I feel like it's like a Mack truck. Like there were just these, I'm watching the layoffs, I'm watching all these things start to take place, and I'm watching the environment kind of creep down, and people are kind of like losing stability in their roles. And in the same time, I'm also setting these revenue targets. And I'm like, if I hit XYZ, then I'll leave my full time. And then I would hit XYZ. And then I was like, well, if I hit ABC, then I'll leave my full time. And that happened like 3 times in a row. And I was like, at what point do I call a spade a spade? Like I said that I was going to do this if I hit this, but now I've hit it 3 times and I'm still not doing it. And I also felt like the biggest tipping point was I felt like I wasn't doing the community any favors by being split all the time. Like I felt like it was really challenging for me to balance. Like it was like 2 to 3 hours of women in sales in the morning, full job during the day, then 2 to 3 to 5 more hours in the evening. And I had absolutely no social life. Like I was just kind of spinning out and doing all this work. And I was like, if I could just have a few more hours a day, if I could just, and eventually enough of those, like if I could just moments happen. And I was like, enough. Like I just have to see how it goes. And I talked to a few people, like mentors of mine and people in close proximity. And my greatest fear, to be honest, which is, not even really rooted in reality, was like, oh my God, what if I can't get back to a sales role? Like if this fails, what if I can't get a sales role again? And I'm like, that's insane. Like I have enough connections where I could go somewhere else. It would be fine. And so once I kind of had some affirmation and people around me kind of rooting and championing, it felt like less of a leap. And I also had set aside a financial nest egg to account for that as well. Cause I was like, I don't know what income is going to look like. And it is a huge challenge to go from having kind of like a steady every 2-week paycheck to these big and little hits, these peaks and valleys. And so I felt like I laid enough of the groundwork that I was like, the excuses are gone. Some of the fear has subsided and it's go time. And you can literally, if you went to our community, you can see like a hockey stick from the day that I went full time. It's like a straight upward trajectory. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, you got that instant validation, which is good. But there's always this fear, I think, in any big change with your career of, am I Icarus flying too close to the sun, right? And like, if you don't know the metaphor on that, Icarus gets on his Pegasus with wings made of wax, and he's one of the only people that has learned how to fly. And he just keeps going higher and higher and higher, even though he doesn't need to. And eventually he gets too close to the sun, his wings melt, and he plummets, right? So there's this idea of, I've done really, really well in this job, and I'm making a lot of money. And if I switch to aim to go higher and to try to do better, do I become Icarus, right? Like, have I actually reached as high as I can possibly go? And now by wanting to do more, do I ruin all of it? I think a lot of folks who recently have gotten laid off have that feeling of, if I was an amazing AE or an ENT AE with an OTE that I was comfortable with, or if I was a manager or a director, heck, even a lot of the VPs that I talk to and VPs that are a part of the women in sales community, right? I had achieved this amazing milestone in my career, and then I got laid off, and then something happened. And am I ever going to get back to where I was? Or did that peak? And now I'm going to go back and I'm going to have to be an individual contributor, or I'm going to have to take a job as a manager. And then it goes one step further to, oh my gosh, was I unqualified to be a VP in the first place? What if I interview and realize I don't have the skills and I don't have what I need? All of those fears can paralyze us and make us accept for less than we are worth. And it takes courage to say, no, I'm going to go one step higher. My wings are not going to melt, right? Like I have titanium wings. They can't melt. They just get hotter and cooler. And so for you, you've jumped all the way into this community. You've taken on this CEO role. What would you say was the first thing that you were super surprised by? Like what caught you off guard?
Oh my God, so many things. I feel like I share a glimpse on LinkedIn, but they were just days where I would like start laughing. I'm like, I just ruined something entirely. And it's everything. It's the behind the scenes stuff that doesn't get seen, the work that doesn't get seen. So it's the tech management of all the platforms and it's the partnerships, running a full partnerships program solo and making sure everybody's happy and comfortable. And it's the legal, the paperwork side, the organization. I'm setting up a Salesforce instance, like behind the scenes. Like it's all these things that I've had to remind myself, and I still have to remind myself to this day. These are uncomfortable and they are difficult because you haven't done them before. And I was really, really hard on myself the first probably like 3 to 4 months. I would just beat myself up when I would like, even with Slack, I'd like mess something up and I forgot to take out where you can hear everyone. And then, everybody gets the group notifications and people were like hearing and then it made a big noise on Slack. And I was like, God, why didn't I think of that? And it's like, why would I have thought of that? It's just so random. So it's a lot of that kind of like self-talk of kind of almost like nurturing myself back where I was like, okay, you wouldn't be good at this because you didn't do it before. And it was also this big acceptance of learning again. Like I had gotten to this point where I only wanted to take on things where I knew I was going to be super, super successful at them. And I lost that desire and that burn to just learn and like learn on the go and be bad at something. And then eventually maybe you get good at it or eventually maybe you don't. So that's been a big curve as well. It's just been like the surprise of all these new things and then kind of the coaching of myself essentially into accepting that I'm not perfect at those things and I may never be.
Yeah. And that's the progress versus perfection. And it's this idea of good enough, right? You had to be like, okay, this is going to be good enough. And it may never be perfect, but sometimes the good enough is perfect. Like for me, I struggled for years in my own personal life, putting my clothes away after doing laundry. And I know a lot of people struggle with this, right? Like this is very, like, just like you've done laundry and then 3 weeks later, you're like, the laundry is in the basket. And I would always torture myself over this idea of like, why can't I just put it away? And what I would do then is for 3 weeks, I would go in and dig through my basket and find the clean clothes I wanted to wear and then wear them. And then I realized, why am I putting myself through this pressure of keeping them all stacked in the basket until I put them away? What if the way that I organize my clothes is I throw them in a drawer after they're clean and then it's good enough, right? And the minute I did that and freed myself from this idea of what the perfect thing is going to do based on somebody else, now when I do my laundry, I have my laundry done and put away because they're all in a pile in a drawer and I know where they are. And like that works for me. Having that maturity and that discipline as a CEO to know when to say good enough or needs to get better. And I think that is a big balance. It's almost the innovation challenge that CEOs find themselves in. How do you gut check? And who do you use, if anybody, even in the community, to gut check? Where is it okay for me to say, you know what, this is good enough versus this does need to be better? How do you make those decisions?
Yeah, honestly, I lean the most on the community. Like we have an incredibly, and you work with us too. Like we have just an incredibly warm and welcoming group. I think that people want to help. I put an ask out this week where I was like, hey, I'm trying to work on something, a specific offering for talent acquisition people who are reaching out to us daily now. Would anybody that's in the talent acquisition role be willing to sit down with me and take a look at what I'm potentially going to build out for us? And immediately got like 5, 6, 7 people to reach out and say, yes, like we're happy to help. We're open to looking at this and seeing if this is something that's viable. I also will own too. I'll be like, hey, we tested this thing now for 6 months. Let me ask you all, has this been effective? Is this something that you're finding value from? And if not, here are a few ideas I had on ways that we could potentially change this. And would these ideas be a better fit? I'm doing this right now for our job seekers. And they are super open to giving feedback and being like, you know what, we didn't necessarily find as much value from that, but we like where you're going with this. So now I can kind of figure out and dedicate my time towards pivoting. And then when I pivot, it might not be perfect either. And so we might have to repivot. And that's something that I've also grown just more comfortable with the idea of there is no, like, you're not going to ship a perfect product day one. It's not possible. It's why we have MVPs. It's why we talk about this idea of not going for perfect. And so I'm starting to become more and more comfortable with that. But if I need to run ideas or talk to people, it's usually the community itself. And I'm glad that I have that level of rapport and that people are willing to step up and help.
One of the things that I admire about you so much is your immense authenticity. Because I think there are so many folks who, given the path that you took, would try to create an element of experience and expertise that they don't have because it's gaps they feel like they need to fill to be taken very seriously. The path that you took from AE to CEO and founder, and being very open about the gaps that you have and how to fill them and what to do. Being aware of where you've won and where you actually need the help of others. I feel like it's a lesson in grace and it's inspiring because there is no right path to get to where you've gotten, right? You can say, I'm an individual contributor that's really good at what I do. And now I have something much bigger and I'm going to dive in. And I don't see you in social media pretending to have this expertise that you don't. You lean very heavily into what you know because you really know it. But then the way that you fill the gaps are so graceful and you also involve others in that learning and that path building. Talk to us a little bit about what that level of authenticity has meant to you and if at any point that's gotten in your head or made you feel insecure. Because we both know there are a lot of people that have either the same or less experience than you that find themselves in CEO roles and they are not as open about their gaps as you are.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, by the way. That was very sweet. Yes. I will say, like, the more authentic you are, like, we all talk about authenticity. Everybody needs to be authentic. You open yourself up to negativity because the more honest I am about, like, hey, I did go straight from AE to CEO, some people are going to really be into that journey. Like, they're like, yes, this is interesting. I could do this. I could make this move. Some people are like, you're not qualified. You never should have done it. You were never a VP. Who are you to have a voice? And so I get a very mixed bag of kind of like who's on either side of that. And I just want to be really honest. Like, people have come for me for this. I have had numerous people who I find out I thought were friends, up front, and then behind the scenes were making fun of the journey or talking down about like that I don't have the right experience. I'm okay with that. Like, if it means that the message gets to the right people, if it means that I'm setting up the company in the way that feels most authentic and best for our community members, I don't care. I can take the heat. I can avoid those people. What you won't see me do is go to war with them on social or do something like that. It's a waste of energy and it is sad, frankly. So it's just one of these interesting things where the more authentic you are, it makes it more challenging because I don't have a foot to stand on. If someone's like, well, how long were you a CRO? I wasn't, and it's all good. But what I do have is the ability to back the work that I'm doing day to day. I'm running a Salesforce instance. I have a quota. I have numbers that we have to hit. I have a specific percentage that I know to bump commission back to myself. I help manage a team. I manage communications, marketing's under me. Anything with legal goes through me. Like, these are all things that I'm managing day to day. And I can speak to that because I'm doing them. And so it's this idea of our friends, Amy Bolles always says this, do the work. I would rather be the person that does the work and is actually honest about the work that I'm doing than the person that's not doing the work and just talking about it.
Yes, +1 to Amy Volas. I think that's exactly right. And not everybody who looks and thinks like you and me, and anybody else that has any element of diversity that we know based on the statistics, doesn't always get the opportunities to grow in their career to very naturally become a founder or CEO. And I think that that feels so limiting for so many people who have the chops, who have the acumen, who have the great ideas that can make a difference. Those folks don't always get the classic career progression, the mentorship, the sponsorship that you would need to be able to grow your career in that way. And the more people like you that blaze a trail and show how it can be done, how we get good people in a C-suite position, founding companies, and learning the chops along the way, that gives hope to so many people who aren't going to be able to do it traditionally. And so, yes, like, let the naysayers be naysayers. They're not trailblazers. They're stuck in the past. And I think what you're doing is one way the future could look. You're really giving options, and your openness, I think, is going to inspire a lot of people. And
you.
speaking of inspiration, you're so welcome. Thank you. Speaking of how we are inspired, we are coming down to our rapid reveal section of the conversation. So I've got some questions for you to help the audience really dig in further into that wonderful mind of yours. So if you are you ready to dive into the rapid reveal section?
Rapid. Okay, I'm scared. Let's go.
Okay, like kind of rapid. You've got 3 questions, 60 seconds or less to answer each. Number 1, do you have any reoccurring dreams?
My dreams are really dark. I just want to like preface. I watch
Oh,
like a lot of
good.
horror movies. I'm
Yes.
like a horror movie.
Yes.
And so I'm not even gonna
Yes.
repeat my dreams. Just know a lot of them are like dark, but I always save myself. Like I could be in any like murdery situation, and at the very end, I always like pull myself out of it and wake up. And
Yeah.
so I don't even know. My dreams are weird, but that is where mine end. I always come out of it. I'm the final girl.
Listen, I'm gonna tell you right now, if it's macabre, I'm certainly gonna love it. I heard somewhere that you can't die in your own dreams.
Oh, maybe
S
that's why
like
then.
and I wonder what happens if you do. Maybe those are people who are able to, like, leave their body. We could have a whole conversation about this, but I, like you, giant fan of horror films, anything macabre, to my own demise at times. Like, I have had times as a woman who is an adult with a child where I've watched a movie that has scared me so badly that I don't wanna go downstairs to get a glass of water, and I'm like, "Christina, you're an adult. You're an adult, and just don't look in the corners up, you know? Like, just look straight ahead of you, don't picture a figure, just, like, look down." And I'm an adult, but I love it, right? The torture. Okay, number 2, and this could lead into that. What's an irrational fear of yours?
Okay, I have a business irrational fear, and then I can give you
Yes.
my personal. I'll give you both. For
Yes.
business, my irrational fear, which came in big time when I was launching, when I was moving into the CEO role full time, was that I'm never going to close a deal again. I was like, what if I never close
Oh,
a deal? Would I just go? And then every time I would close a contract, like for the first 3-4 months, we were doing really, really well. Like we had a great Q1. And I would be like, what if that was the last deal I ever inked? What if this is the last one? And I would literally be sending like a panda doc out as I'm like having these thoughts. And so that was definitely an irrational business fear. That always came to mind. And then personal fear, this that we're getting real personal here. I am a bit of a hypochondriac. If you know me, you know that, and you love me for it. But
yes.
I am terrified of hypodermic needles. Like that is my greatest fear. So if you see me, I'm like a look down walker. Like I like to walk around the city, but I like keep an eye out at all times. So that is my greatest irrational fear walking about Chicago.
Like, you're worried
Is it?
you're worried you're gonna step on a discarded needle of sorts?
That's
Yeah.
it. That is like my greatest fear. That would be it. Yep.
Honestly, one of mine that makes no sense in the city that I live in is I share my fears on this podcast far too often because I have a lot of them, but another one that I have not shared yet is ticks. I am ungodly
Same.
terrified of a tick. But, like, I live in the city, but I'm not
No.
gonna let me tell you something. Every gust of wind, I'm like, "Did a tick blow on me?" Like, I'm downtown. There's not a tree in sight or a wilderness or foliage of any kind, and yet a gust of wind, I'm like, "Is there a chance that a tick blew upon me and I now have Lyme disease?" So, it's
I
where
have
it's
that
at.
one too. That one's universal
Woo!
now.
You think? Do you think
I
other
think
people
so.
walk around afraid of wind? Yeah,
Not to that
it's
extent, but I
possible.
do know everybody's, like, afraid of ticks now, and also every time I go on any social media, they're like, "Surprise, ticks are now, like, microscopic." I'm like, "What do we even do? What
Okay.
do you look for? How do you
I
know?"
can't you would just we
Earlier.
just submit. We submit and we become the tick. See?
Yes.
It's going macabre. Okay, number 3. What was the last thing to inspire you?
I have a good one for this. So my dad, again, for people who know me, or if you follow me on LinkedIn, I post about my dad probably once every couple months. He is a real life, basically rocket scientist. He doesn't actually work on the rockets, but he does. He teaches at Purdue University mechanical engineering, and he builds experiments that go onto the rockets, which go to the International Space Station. And so we just a couple days ago, they just had a launch that was a cargo mission to International Space Station, and we watched it as a family. And that was probably my last really cool moment.
Oh, I love it. I love it when it's parents and loved ones that inspire us.
Yeah, it's also, like,
Beautiful.
incredibly intimidating because my dad will be like, "I don't call this afternoon. I'm on the phone with NASA." And I'm like, "What?" So, it's very
Oh,
intimidating. He's had a very successful career, but what I will say is he can also, in the same hand, appreciate the work that I'm doing and is very proud of what I'm building as well. So, it's kinda cool. We're in very different worlds, but it's fun to see, especially your parents, like, as they're I think a lot of his peers are starting to retire at this point, which is great for them. He doesn't want to retire and he's really happy and he loves teaching. And so it's really cool seeing him get more and more recognition like at this stage in his career. It's been really fun to watch. I'm like, good for you.
good for you. Well, like your father, I am proud and I admire immensely the work that you are doing. And I imagine that folks are going to want to connect with you. Anybody who identifies as a woman listening to this, you need to be a part of Women in Sales. Where can folks find you?
Yes. So the best place to find me is through my personal LinkedIn under my name, Alexine Mudawar. But then we also have a LinkedIn for women in sales. And we have an incredible group, including Christina, who run women in sales behind the scenes and are part of this work. And in addition, we have a Slack community, which we post very, very frequently through that same LinkedIn page. So if you want to get in on the day-to-day conversations, it's on Slack. If you want to have visibility into events, things that are coming up in content, that's the Women in Sales LinkedIn. And if you want to just hear my rumblings and ramblings, that's my personal LinkedIn.
Amazing. Alexine, thank you so much for spending your beautiful time with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Taking the Lead. If you're looking for more inspiring stories from women leaders in B2B tech, then visit us at motionagency.io/takingthelead.